I am now recording. I want to welcome you all to our event today, where we are going to be introduced to the research of three of our new faculty in the humanities. I just have a couple of quick introductions and then we'll get underway. But I also wanted to mention the format that we're going to follow today. So each speaker will be speaking for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So it's a very informal process. I think Dr. Turcat is probably going to go first, then we'll have Shelby Johnson, and then Reanae McNeal. Sorry, all doctors, Dr. Johnson and Dr. McNeal. But I wanted to just start off by welcoming everyone and telling you about some of the things that we have coming up for the Humanities Center. And mostly I would just say, take a look at our website where we have information on some things coming up, including next Friday, the 3rd, and then the following Friday, the 10th, we have two events organized by the English department, focused on diverse teaching with the guest speaker, Christina Cedillo. And then we also have Jessie Meyer coming in the first week of March after spring break, so the week of the 20th, on the 21st and 22nd of March. He's coming to talk about parchment in conjunction with the medieval manuscripts that we have on campus this semester. I also want to mention that we are soon going to be posting the call for papers. Oh, sorry, the 22nd, 23rd. Thank you, Vera. We moved our dates around a little bit, so thank you for correcting me on that. We also are going to be posting soon our call for applications for the fellowship program, the research group fellowships. Reanae is one of those fellows. So if you feel like you want to ask questions about that to anyone who's here, you know, either myself or Reanae can answer questions about that program as well. So I think that's it for now, but I put some links in there and I'll add those again, just to make sure that everyone who came in a little bit late can see those. And the reason I put in the experts directory is that I think that's a great tool for us all to use to connect as well. So we're using this event and its existence as a recording to help introduce some of our new colleagues to the rest of the community at OSU. But the experts directory is another way that people can get to know each other and find out what our colleagues are doing on campus. But of course, that's also something that we really prioritize with the Center for the Humanities. Okay, so I think that's all that I wanted to say at this point. So I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, who is Dr. Jessica Turcat, and she is associated with the Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies program. So take it away, Jessica.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to do this. I love talking about myself, as most poets and scholars do, so it's a fun way to start. So yeah, I'm a teaching assistant professor for the Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies program here at OSU, and my degree, my PhD is actually in English with an emphasis in poetry. And women's writing is what I've studied from undergraduate through master's. So I like that because one of the things I love about GWST is you can cast a wide net and kind of go wherever the muse takes you. And so in my research, it's always in the same areas of women's writing and poetry, and specifically I'm teaching right now classes, the intro classes, and then also on gender and representation and body image, which is a body politics class. So I like researching body politics, and then I'm also teaching a new course titled Mothering. So I love the way that my personal life can pair nicely with my professional endeavors. And I have a 10-year-old stepson, a 4-year-old boy, a 2-year-old girl, and then I have a darling little bundle, 3-month-old, who is just starting to giggle. So I'm totally immersed in the mothering, but that's also parlaying nicely into my writing. I'm currently finishing up I'm going to call it a memoir because I just found out that term. So instead of a memoir piece, a memoir, kind of autoethnography on embodied mothering and what it takes to mother like through the pandemic and work from home and try to balance those various endeavors. And so that's been very nice to reflect on what I'm doing each day in my own personal writing and like what it takes to practice attachment parenting and nursing, not to mention the older ones, parenting them while still continuously writing and teaching and all the things that go into this career. So that's where I'm at on that. Then I'm also writing a piece on women who write animals. I studied under the poet I while I was a graduate student getting my PhD, and there's just, since her passing, there has been very little writing about her, and I just want to be the one who picks that up and keeps shining the spotlight on her fantastic work. So I'm doing a deep critical analysis of 3 of her poems focused on the relationship between women and their animals. Specifically, if you're unfamiliar with the poetry of I, definitely check it out. But it's incredibly violent and graphic, and so the relationship that these women have with the animals often mirrors the violence that they have been subjected to throughout their life. And then they take that out on the animals, even going so far as to kill the animals. And so I'm looking at that relationship in that writing. And then I just finished a poem myself that I have worked on for 2 years. So if you're a poet, you know that sometimes it just comes to you and you can just, the muse strikes and you just get it down on the page. And other ones, they are more a labor of love. And so this has been a poem that I have worked and reworked and kind of polished, but it's titled Teotowaki, which is an initialism for the end of the world as we know it. And it's a personal narrative in the dramatic monologue style where the woman is a survivalist. So it's a female survivalist voice who served during the Bosnia 1993 crisis. But it's present day. So it's how this woman, having gone through that, is now prepping for the end of the world as we know it. So I don't know, sometimes people don't think a lot of research goes into poetry, but I will definitely be one to counter that because it's 2 years of research to pop that off. But I finally submitted it to some 10 journals, so I'm hoping it gets published pretty quickly because it's a fun and timely, and it's very dark, like following in the shoes of the poet I. So it's dark and graphic, and I'm very happy to have that finalized. But yeah, that's about what I'm doing right now.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I already learned about things that I didn't know you were working on. So I'm excited to have some time for questions at the end. Okay, let's just move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Shelby Johnson in the English department.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm grateful to learn from my fellow presenters and to be in community with all of you. I do have a PowerPoint that I'm going to try to pull up to have some images at certain points in the talk. and I'll kind of like flip back and forth, I think. So I have recently joined the Department of English, where I specialize in early American studies, and my teaching and my research are often located at the intersections of race, sexuality, and ecology. And currently I'm working on 2 book projects. I may have time to talk about the second one, but I'll probably primarily focus on the first one. It's titled The Rich Earth Between Us, The Intimate Grounds of Race and Sexuality in the Early Atlantic World. And primarily this research is rooted in attending to early Indigenous and Black writers from the late 18th and early 19th century. And for this project, it includes Samson Occam, Mary Prince, William Apis, and Robert Wedderburn. And I'm interested in these figures because I'm trying to kind of track the way that they're cultivating what I'm sort of speculatively calling small plots, these sort of like moments of rupture or interruption to colonialism that I sort of like envision as these sort of alternative world making performances, and that these small plots chart pathways through and beyond settler colonialism and slavery. To put that a little bit differently, I'm trying to understand how early writers are sort of like orienting against systemic regimes of imperialism through kind of like a specific gesture that I've noticed sort of like repeatedly across these 4 writers. And it's sort of evoked in citations of Psalm 115:16, that the earth was given to the children of men. And this particular verse seems to kind of carry with it this conception of shared community, of communal kind of like possession and inhabitants in the earth, and sort of like performances of commoning, which are like very counter to forms of propertied individualism and territorial dispossession that, you know, we see accelerating across the 18th century. And to give, or to sort of speak of that more specifically, I'm interested in how Occam, Prince, Wedderburn, and Apis's work kind of index these alternative world-making systems, but they're often kind of preserved in these kind of hidden knowledges and kind of like small improvised genres that would have been largely opaque within a lot of settler records that are kind of like systemically implicated in erasing Black and Indigenous knowledge. And in terms of kind of like method, a lot of this work is kind of grounded in an effort to kind of like untangle, unearth these small plots from encounters with colonial power as far as I can, and to turn to these kind of seemingly incidental moments or brief texts to think about how they extend alternative and fugitive sort of patterns of knowledge production and social reproduction, social assembly. And to offer one example, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of this small basket or this sort of carved box that Samson Occam created and sent to his sister near the end of his life. This is kind of like an image of it. It's a carved elm box that makes use of traditional Mohegan Trail of Life and Path of the Sun designs that are still used in sort of like ceremonial objects and clothing in the Mohegan Nation today. And Occam sent this basket sometime in the 1780s after he and a kind of like small community of multi-tribal members of the sort of like broader Algonquian communities in the Northwest, in the Northeast, relocated to Brothertown in New York in the wake of the American Revolution. And one of the ways I'm trying to think about this box is how it reflects the survivance of Mohegan sort of knowledge ways, literally and figuratively, and how it sort of like maintains this connection between Indigenous persons who are sort of like experiencing diaspora and sort of relocating to Brothertown, but also trying to maintain connections with their kin who are still in the Mohegan, who had decided to remain at the Mohegan homeland in Connecticut, where his sister remained. And so I've been thinking about how this sort of like box kind of carries the weight of impossible choices that are sort of like endemic to settler colonialism and which conditioned late 18th century kind of Algonquian exigence. But it sort of like is this small plot, this interruption of a kind of entire political system that is emerging as the United States is now coming into being. And so I think kind of broadly my use of world, I've been thinking a lot with Ariella Aisha Azule's Unlearning Imperialism, with a term that or a phrase that she uses called worldly sovereignty, or persisting in repressed forms and formations of being in the world, shaped by and through intimate knowledge of the world and its secrets, of its multiple natural, spiritual, political, and cosmological taxonomies preserved and transmitted across generations. And so each chapter in my book is really about sort of like trying to center a mode of relating to a local ecosystem or a form of intimate life. So Occam with sort of like Mohegan geographical knowledges, Mary Prince with the Caribbean salt industries, William Apis with woodland edge ecologies, and Wedderburn kind of grounded in his experiences of enslavement in Jamaica, sort of like his prophetic visions of what kind of planetary anti-colonial commons could be. And so across kind of like these investigations, my aim in my research is not so much to excavate the fullness kind of like of these worlds, but to try to illuminate, even if briefly, their conditions of possibility, how they sort of gesture to what it could look like to inhabit history in the earth otherwise, which is very much animated, I think, by our own sort of like position as we see climate change accelerating. And so broadly, like this project argues that Black and Native writers are plumbing the facts of history to unearth the colonial epistemologies that sustain racial capitalism and settler colonialism. And they're offering not necessarily history itself, but counter propositions of history that has been disavowed. And a lot of sort of like my thinking on kind of the archive and hidden knowledge and sort of like what counts as a text, I think extends particular challenges for teaching, especially early American literature, which is sort of primarily what I work on. I'll actually be teaching Samson Occam's box in a few weeks in my survey of American literature class, where our kind of like governing theme or governing question is sort of what is a text, and who sort of like gets to decide, and what forms of archival formation or knowledge production get kind of like erased depending on which definitions we use. So I can continue talking about my research. I think though I'm kind of getting close to the 8 to 10 minute mark. And I don't want to take Reanae's time. So I will pause here then. Stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. We will definitely have time to extend any additional comments that we might want to either that you want to expand on, or if folks have specific questions. I think that will there will be plenty of time for that. So thank you again, Shelby. And our third speaker today is Dr. Reanae McNeal, who is who is in English and Interdisciplinary Diversity Studies, and I think especially focused in gender and women's and sexuality studies. Reanae.
Thank you. Shelby, I was trying to give you a hand clap and my reactions I couldn't get them to work, but so it was a beautiful presentation that you did. And I also just want to say that my official position is assistant professor in gender, women, and sexuality studies and Africana studies. So I get the great opportunity of having a joint position in the things that I love, as well as the department home in English. I also want to acknowledge that I'm a granddaughter, I am a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm an auntie, and I'm an other mom. And so I acknowledge that and I honor that, because that is vitally important in my worldview, that I am part of a web of relations. The other thing I would like to do in terms of my research as I begin this presentation is two things. First, I would like to honor those who are unable to be here and who are dying because of their markers of difference. And so my work is really dedicated to the most vulnerable in our society. I also want to start with Alice Walker's quote, womanist Alice Walker, who says, "Look closely at the present you are constructing. It should look like the future you are dreaming." And so I am a dreamer. And so because of that, my research reflects that, the type of dreaming and the type of future that I want to see, which is a radically inclusive society where everyone has a sacred place. So my research involves decolonial approaches that accentuate the lived experiences of the marginalized, especially women. In my work, I promote social change, advance cross-cultural understanding, cultivate reparative and restorative justice, and foster the healing of deep wounds through radical love and transformation. So my research-based creative work and scholarly endeavors address such topics as marginalized her stories, diversity, resiliency, faith, spirituality, and healing. And because of that, some of the things I wanted to give, some of the top things that I particularly address is the her stories of Afro-Indigenous women. And these are women who have heritage of both African, American, and Native heritage. I'm currently doing a book on Afro-Indigenous women's survivance and the interrelated her stories of Black and Indigenous women. Survivance meaning survival and resistance. So I'm looking at their rhetorics and literacies, and particularly lived experiences and oral traditions of preservation that have been used across communities. Also, I'm working on a digital project currently, my research on Afro-Indigenous women to feature, at least right now, 4, so that the public can have more access and make these women more known. I am a community engaged activist, scholar, and I'm interested in bringing visibility, particularly to those who are marginalized. And so another part of my research particularly deals with also those intertwined, interrelated, and comparative her stories of African American and Native women in terms of activism, lived experience. Additionally, my research is land-based. And so I'm currently and have been looking at Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole freed women who are also both African American and Native heritage, particularly their activism and their stories. And so I also do archival work as well, and I look at that archival work as an extension and a part of the work that I do around reparative and restorative justice. I'm also currently doing work around health justice and Black women, which is an extension of my work around the healing activism of Black women. This particular work is being particularly highlighted now because I'm also a Center for Humanities fellow. Yay! Which I absolutely have had a joy, and it's been a privilege to be a fellow. And so I hope those who are here that you do apply to be a fellow. It is a wonderful program. So I'm currently doing that work and that research and connecting. It's particularly important to connect my research to real world problems and to reflect and to process on how I can contribute as an activist, scholar, and as a member of a global community. I also do research on women's leadership and wellness. And so women's leadership has been particularly important to me, especially highlighting women's leadership that often goes unhighlighted. So part of my research on women's leadership has been on the International Council of 13 Indigenous Grandmothers. And they are 13 elders across nations who came together to do what they called sacred activism and peace activism. They called this sacred activism, we pray and take action. And so looking at these particular models of leadership, which often go marginalized, of women who are doing activist work and having to navigate hostile landscapes. Also, my research consists of transformative pedagogies. I am a lover of diverse pedagogies, and so I like to braid them together. I call it doing, I love thinking of my methods in terms of hair. So I like to cornrow them together, braid them together. And so this has been a joy and a love while grounding my pedagogies in the lived experiences of members of diverse and multiple communities, while looking and inviting students to review individuals and communities across social locations. And last but not least, I have been enjoying life writing, which has been are very powerful to me in like doing more research and in this area and reflecting on that more. My research often takes the form of a variation of formats. I play with methods and methodologies. I also challenge methods and methodologies in terms of how, not only how or should they be applied. And so, and I also create methods and methodologies. So research, coming to research to me in very specific and certain ways that often challenge what has become known as the traditional format. So my work is usually multi-genre, often grounded in creative forms of that is research based. And so with that said, thank you all for listening, and I really appreciate being in this community.
Thank you so much, Reanae. That was great. I am so happy to know more about what all three of you are working on. We have some time for questions. So whether that is questions between our speakers, or if there's anyone out there in our audience that would like to ask a question, you can do so by unmuting, or you are also welcome to use the chat if that is a preferable mode for you. Any of those will work. And I'll just remind you, we've got a couple people who had to leave early, and I'll just remind everyone that we will have this recorded and posted as soon as possible. So we'll make sure to send that out to our various email lists and make sure that everyone's aware when that is available. But questions? We have observations and gratitude from our attendees.
I have a question actually for both Jessica and Reanae, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Both of you, thank you so much for your presentations. I was really interested in how both of you were thinking through kind of like the relationship between kind of political systems and kinship formations with particular kinds of embodied and kind of deeply felt like autobiographical experiences. And I was wondering if either of you would feel like saying a little bit more about how like this orientation towards kinship and motherhood and activism maybe plays out more specifically in the classroom, and how your students kind of like come into community with these forms of being in the world that you both like presented so beautifully.
Oh, I'll jump on that. Definitely. So, yeah. I mean, I'm sure maybe you've heard of the CDC study that just came out a few days ago where 57% of teenage girls marked that they experience perpetual sadness and hopelessness. And this connects to our work because the young women coming into our classroom and young men, they are the ones that are feeling that sadness, that hopelessness. And this is, I mean, it has, the pandemic exacerbated that, but this is an ongoing toxicity in our culture and affecting populations, but it comes in the classroom, and I think in the feminist classroom is a place where that can be met, acknowledged, and then worked through. among a group. And I've seen that in the mothering class and in the intro classes and the like the body politics class I teach in different ways. So that when you're focused on talking about the body, it can't just be focused on pop cultural images, but you have to bring it, you know, to make the personal, the political, or the political, the personal, and get students to open up and look at their relationship to their body and look at the disservice that our culture is doing in not educating about the body, in not teaching young ones even how to love and respect or have morals associated around their actions with that affect their body, that is their body for their entire life, right? And then in like a mothering class, how much more so important that one loves their body, because there are young people directly in their care that they are taking. So in the extreme, we have parents doing violence and murdering and hurting their children. And that's multifaceted and very complex in the support that they need. But definitely just on a broader level, we have a whole culture that where the young people are saying we need parents to do better, we need more support. And so I think parents, teachers, psychiatrists, religious leaders, politicians, I think it has to go across the board. But that's what I love in the classroom, is tackling these subjects, because I know that not only are we helping the students, but by teaching those lifelong lessons, they are able to apply them later in their life when they're in intimate partnerships, or when they are mothering or caretaking, or just in the public sphere of entering the workforce, of being individuals who say, you know, this isn't working, there is these other ways of doing. So I'll let Reanae jump on that as well.
Yeah, I was excited when you were talking. Just building on what you're saying. I think for me, it's very similar when we think about bodies and inviting students to think about difference. For me, is important, and difference in those bodies, and what does it mean to not feel at home in your own body, based on systems, based on labeling, based on markers of difference. So for me, in the classroom is one of the ways that I invite students to think about those things and feel things. Because I don't want them to just use their mind. It's not just an intellectual endeavor. I don't want them to leave their body, their spirit, or their emotions behind. And so that is important to me, to make that integral to the classroom experience. Also, for me, especially during these times, also for students to see variations of bodies, especially bodies that have been marginalized, especially bodies that where there is particular histories of these bodies not being knowledge producers, to have those types of images reflected in the classroom, and to have their what I call wisdom systems in the classroom. So they're seeing multiple images of people across communities, and from quotes to wisdom systems to even formatting. And it's all an embodied invitation to think about a very diverse world. Also, I think it can be particularly interesting when one lives in at quote unquote abnormal society, because hatred and bigotry, these different things that have tried to be normalized, are definitely abnormal in my eyes. And so having students to be able to process and to not only think about that, but invite students to reflect on what they can do about it. Womanist Alice Walker says the biggest way that one gives up power is by thinking they don't have any. And so part of the classroom for me is inviting students to show that they do have power and to give models of the different ways that communities and people have practiced resiliency and resistance in embodied ways. So that's some of the ways that I bring it to the classrooms. And
That was a great question and wonderful responses. Thank you so much. Other questions for our speakers? I think I have a question that really could kind of connect to all of you in different ways. And you know, maybe you've addressed this a little bit already, but I was wondering if you could, or if you wanted to expand a little bit on exactly kind of those relationships between what you do in the classroom and how it plays a role in your research, or how you conceptualize the relationship between your teaching and your research, and then also kind of thinking about, and I think again this probably connects to all three of your areas of expertise, but you know, kind of thinking about the relationship between the circumstances in which you are all currently teaching and doing research, and relationships to history and the past in different ways. I know, and perhaps, you know, also the future, yes. But, you know, kind of thinking about how you teach you know, kind of historical content and connecting it to sort of the contemporary, or how that also plays a role in your research. So sorry, that's kind of a big open-ended question, but you can kind of tackle it however you want.
I guess I can just say a few things about maybe specifically one of the class I'm teaching this semester. And I'll actually preface this by apologizing too with like the weather change. I keep sort of having like a scratchy throat. So if I start coughing, like, I'm sorry. But I'm teaching, it's like a sophomore level, you know, American Survey of American Literature to 1865, which is about as kind of like canonical a course as it could get in terms of the curriculum. And it was actually interesting when I looked at like the course catalog, the sort of like blurb was Puritans through like the American Romantics, like the Transcendentalists. And I was just like, oh God. And so by kind of like structuring the course around kind of like this question of what is a text, what is an archive, who like is legible as knowledge producers in kind of like under the kind of purview of settler colonialism, it kind of has necessitated a sort of transhistorical approach where, you know, we're pairing kind of texts from the 16th, 17th, 18th century with more contemporary kind of remeditations, remediations of important events and figures. This, you know, has looked like pairing selections from John Smith's General History of Virginia with, you know, Disney's film on Pocahontas with kind of like Mattapony oral history to kind of like navigate across text, popular representations of the colonial past and kind of like indigenous challenges to those representations. And so kind of like the matter of history, I guess, is never neutral. in these classes, and it really requires a kind of like flexibility and improvisation. And so far my students have been really excited about it and like generous and willing to kind of engage in these questions. It really matters to them. I think I was thinking a lot about what Jessica was saying about sort of like the stress and the burnout, and like one way to address this is thinking about what futures are possible, even under sort of the trying conditions that we find ourselves in now. And I really think that a lot of the figures that I try to bring to my, colonial literature classes kind of open up these alternative futures that, I don't know, I think it's worth engaging with them and grappling with them, even if our circumstances are a little bit different today. We've inherited these challenges. So yeah, kind of moving back and forth between discourse communities and embodied knowledge and material objects across different sites and space and time has been kind of the way that I've tried to think about what it means to carry this work into the future.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to talk about any of those facets or respond to Shelby?
I can jump on that because you talked about the flexibility needed. And so since 2019, I've been using open education resources for that exact purpose. And I think they marry so well with feminist pedagogy and allowing a decentering of the professor as the semester goes, and letting students take the reign and get their own, bring in their own materials to specifically answer parts of your question, Jennifer. I think, I think in terms of teaching embodiment in the classroom, I began by always looking at like the ornamental and talking about like Harry Styles wearing a skirt and Brad Pitt on the red carpet wearing a skirt, and what does this mean, and what are the social ramifications, and is it just a skirt, and this breaking down the binary of Butler, and then we move on to more, closer to the performance of moving away from the performance of the body, but more to the physical attributes, such as fat politics, and we look at Lizzo and what she does with her body, and the statements that she's made with her body, and then I try as the semester goes to push them even more to looking at how their body can do more than just the physical and the presentation of it, but the biological functions of the body, and it takes so little to stun students by how wonderful and fantastic their body is. And I think it goes back to like our culture just like lacks that desire to educate young people about how beautiful and miraculous and stunning the body can be. So talking about, I've had a student who was just mind blown that the belly button has a biological function, and had never thought about that. I mean, this is a 20-year-old man who had never thought about his belly button as being a connection biologically to his birth mother. And what that was what sustained his life in utero. I mean, he was just, what? Talking with in the mothering class and the body politics class, I teach breastfeeding and mammary glands, and how that functions, and the biological process of doing that, and historically throughout history, why it was imperative for women to have orgies under the full moon all at the same time, and get pregnant all at the same time, so that they birth all at the same time and can like feed together together and why that's necessary throughout human history, but we've lost that tradition, but we've lost that knowledge. And with the lack of knowledge, we've also lost the appreciation for how beautiful and communal we really are as human beings. And I hope that answers.
I was just going to build on what was said as well. Like in my classroom, I don't think of history as past. In my worldview, it's always present. And so one of the ways I work to invite students to, especially thinking about embodied histories that are very much present, and is an example of that is the Tulsa Race Massacre of the last survivors left who are elders, having them look at these elders in court, telling these stories and working on getting justice. So students are able to see embodiment. They're able to not only connect, which by that time they would have, I would have given them information that they dwell into from archive to video on the Tulsa Race Massacre, but to actually hear from community members that it actually happened too. So these are some of the ways that I help them to think about history as not being past, but very much connected. And so I bring, and also embodiment. I think about when I'm doing my research and when I'm doing my teaching, inviting students to think further about embodiment than human bodies. And so I have I teach on the grandmothers that I talked about, the International Council of Grandmothers in my Intro to Gender Studies class, and also do have a video about why it's important to do land acknowledgement, so that students can get other worldviews of thinking about going beyond a human-centric, if you will, worldview, by thinking about land as bodies and other bodies that also occupy our world, and what that means. And as well as thinking about multiple perspectives of histories that are very much present. And so these are some of the ways that I invite students, by going in and out of time in ways that complicate even the terminology of history.
Thank you so much, all of you, for those thoughtful and yes, thought-provoking responses. Are there any other questions or comments from our attendees? We have just a couple more minutes left of our session. Well, perhaps we could end with just a recap of some of the points that we made at the beginning, which is just to sort of remind everyone to share this recording with others that they know weren't able to attend. But also, if you in your departments have new folks coming in next year, I hope that we can continue the series, and so I'll reach out, but feel free to let me know when you have somebody in your department who you would like to help share their work for. I would also say that, again, I think one of the goals of this series is to facilitate connection and collaboration, which is something that the Center for the Humanities really prioritizes. And one of the ways that we are interested in doing that is through the new fellowship program. And so again, I would encourage people to keep an eye out for that call for applications, or even if you aren't able to apply this year, that you might consider doing so in future years. And I'm always very happy to answer questions. We'll probably have a information session coming up in a couple of weeks to answer any questions about that. And now we have a great first year group of fellows for whom, everyone who might be interested can tap that group of scholars to think about how their experiences have gone this year. And so, yes, I'll just remind everyone to, if you're looking for info on our events, go to our website. And we just really, really appreciate everyone taking their time out today during their lunch hour to meet these excellent scholars that we have at our university and to think about how everybody's work is connected. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to stop the recording. There we go.